Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Darren Kalman, and I am Vice President of Business Development here at Simeio Solutions. I've been in the identity management and security space since 1997, working on both the vendor and delivery side of things throughout my career. Upa?
Thanks, Darren. Hi, everyone. My name is Upa Hazarika. I'm Senior Director of Marketing and Strategy at Palerra. I've been predominantly in the network security space for the last 10 years, and then the last 4 have been spent in the cloud security space.
All right, so during today's session, Upa and I will talk about how to develop a layered defense strategy for today's modern enterprise. We'll talk about how to proactively and continuously protect your apps, whether those applications are on-premise or in the cloud. We'll talk about detection and remediation of incidents. And finally, we'll discuss automation, automating the workflow to ensure gap-free security architecture. Next slide, thank you. So every presentation on identity management and security always opens with some stats on data breaches. And this session is going to be no exception to that. As a matter of fact, when Upa and I were separately developing the content, we had 2 such slides in the deck, so we had to pull one of them out. I found this graphic recently, and it charted some of the more recent breaches. It was actually just updated a couple of days ago to reference the recent Anthem breach. You know, it's no longer shocking to see in the headlines that a single breach will expose millions of account identities. And typically, you know, some of these statistics, they sound like journalistic sensationalism. Most all of these things have material impacts on organizations. You know, you'll see CEOs getting fired. You know, they're losing their positions in their jobs. The recent breach at Sony, you know, movies are getting leaked to the internet. Companies are losing customers. Individuals are losing money. And, you know, these are just the incidents that are getting reported or that we're really hearing about that even become these statistics. Next slide, please. So now think about those breaches on the last slide and add to it the demands of the current workforce. So you have the millennials, and then, you know, these guys in the picture here are probably younger than that, but, you know, surely this generation here, they expect instant access and everywhere access to all kinds of information. So you have organizations that are forced to give greater access to some of their most sensitive IP so that they themselves can compete effectively in the market. So you literally have billions of devices that are requesting access to various applications that contain highly sensitive company, you know, information and data. If you look at this one statistic here that, you know, Gartner recently predicted that enterprise data, you know, within the enterprise alone is going to grow 650% in the next 5 years. Next slide, please. Okay, so what about the applications that are being accessed at these various organizations? One survey said that the average enterprise company, the average enterprise organization, now has over 500 applications that are being used by, you know, their current workforce and their customer base. If you add to that statistic that more and more of these apps are now being offered as a SaaS solution, you potentially have less control over how people are accessing and using these applications. So for example, the marketing team at a given company can subscribe to a SaaS application and they completely bypass the IT security group. Gone are the days when you would expect that, you know, your typical on-prem applications, your ERP, your CRM, your HR systems, your financial applications, you know, that they all reside in-house. You know, that's no longer the case. And you don't necessarily have IT experts at each of these applications that are, you know, that are on your staff either. So if you think about getting a handle on these applications that you're providing to your workforce, you feel like you really do have control. You're probably fooling yourselves, but even if you can say that you have a control on all of these myriad of applications, what happens during a merger or an application when you potentially double the number of applications that are being brought into in-house? You've increased the number of employees and customers that you're dealing with. You've increased the number of devices that are connecting. So this thing just keeps multiplying and multiplying over and over again. Next slide, please. So, you know, fortunately, technologies exist to address many of these issues. Identity and access management solutions have been around for decades. And these applications, these platforms, they can help address tons and myriads of regulations that we hear about all the time across the world. And when they're used correctly, they can protect against these breaches. And if a breach happens, they can lock down the accounts before any real damage is done. And they can be implemented in a fashion that really isn't taking away from the end user experience. So later on in the presentation, Upa is going to talk a bit more specifically about how Palerra can help with cloud apps. But the key point here is that for every attack and breach that we have seen, there are technologies available that can, or at least could have, helped to prevent one of these headline incidents. Next slide, please. Okay, so while the technologies themselves do exist to help us stay ahead of the bad folks, many times the solutions themselves, they're not implemented correctly, or organizations aren't investing in the day-to-day operations of the platforms that they're installing. I would take this, consider this like, you buy a house and you invest in a beautiful garden and landscape, for your home, but then you never water or treat the grass and the plants, and soon you're left with pretty much a big, expensive pile of dirt. Not to say that these technologies are dirt, but hopefully you get the metaphor. And so in many cases, organizations, they can't find the right security subject matter experts, or you'll find that information is typically tribal in nature. It's in the hands of a few experts that you might have in-house on these various systems, but it's not really properly documented. Or maybe you're trying to protect information and access a new application that sits in the cloud, one where you've taken a leap of faith that the service provider that you're subscribing to has done their own due diligence in protecting your assets. Or maybe you just trust the default security configurations that come with the application that you're subscribing to. And then if you've invested in a team to maintain the day-to-day operations, are they also available to monitor the vast majority and this extensive amount of identity-related data and information that's being generated? So next slide, please. Okay, so putting it all together, now you have bad people, wanting to do bad things to your company, or at the very least, they want to get their hands on the sensitive data that you hold. You have an exponentially growing number of ways that people can or should be able to access the various applications and information. You have a growing number of applications coming on every single day. You have a limited supply of subject matter experts available within your organization to help. So you have one or two options. One option is, like this guy is doing, is you put your head in the sand and you wait to become the next headline. Or next slide, please. You can take a proactive position. So let us help you, and the purpose of this webcast is really to help you create and implement a security playbook. Let us show you how you can proactively protect your cloud footprint, just as you do your on-premise legacy applications with an identity management program. Understand that there are tools and processes that will allow for continuous monitoring of security configurations, and start to not only detect but also start to predict threats, get ahead of the curve. And when a threat is recognized, when you see something coming, automatically address and remediate the incident, again, before you're a headline statistic. Next slide, please. All right, so play number one in this playbook, it's about identity management really being a business enabler. So regulations exist to give us at least a minimum standard to follow to meet the necessary privacy and compliance demands that are out there. Choosing the right partner will put you on the path of reducing costs and complexity while increasing your security posture. And then when security is done poorly, it's either non-effective or it becomes a real burden on the end user. I always give this example of switching from one banking institution to another. I did this several years ago because the bank that I was working with had me answer a bunch of challenge response questions every single time before even prompting me for a password. Eventually, it became too much of a burden, and they lost my business. I went somewhere else. So when identity management is done correctly, it has a minimal negative impact on the end user. And in fact, identity information, it can be used by the business to really provide you with more personalized content while still providing those necessary security protections. So this opens a whole new realm of business opportunities, for the enterprise at large. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Upa to talk more specifically about the capabilities that Palerra has.
Great, thanks, Darren. So there's a few other plays that we wanted to kind of bring to your attention. The first one is about continuous monitoring, and I'm going to talk a lot about this specifically as it relates to the cloud because that is kind of our key focus. But I think the theory could also be applied to on-premise applications as well. So when I say continuous monitoring, what I really mean by that is monitoring things that have impact to security, specific configurations. So maybe you want your application to always have passwords that are 12 characters long, or maybe you want to always ensure that SSL is used for the cloud application. So those are configurations that applications, or specifically cloud applications, will allow you to set today. And you want to be able to set them, and you want to ensure that they stay at that setting. So you might have internal or external audit mandates that define, in order for your company's security posture to be compliant, they need to meet these, they have to have these specific settings. So when we say continuous monitoring, we're essentially referring to the fact that you have a way of monitoring that these settings are constantly kept at the level that they're expected. So let's talk about why is this important, first of all. Now, it's important, as I said, from a compliance standpoint, because you have mandates that stipulate that these settings need to be at a certain level, and you want to make sure that there is never any changes or what we call configuration drift. Now, there are ways of doing monitoring, and today, if a lot of people, you could use scripts, but a lot of it is also manual. And the issue with doing manual monitoring of these settings or configurations is the fact that, first of all, it's really labor intensive. So, we have hundreds of applications, like Darren pointed out, running within the organization. And so it becomes infeasible at some point to do this manually. The second thing is, obviously, there's always human error. And so you may have configuration drift where you may not notice that one specific setting for one application out of the 100 applications that you have has changed. So for continuous monitoring, it's really critical to basically automate that process and let technology help you do it. Now, when it comes to monitoring, there's actually 3 different parts to monitoring these configurations. The first is you need to define what is the initial state for each setting within each application, and that's a one-time job. So once you say these are my defined settings for this application, you basically have them push to the application, and then the second step is now you need to monitor these configurations, and you want to do it in an automated fashion. The third thing is, if your automated monitoring tool notices that there is configuration drift, and it could be for various reasons. It could be that there are multiple administrators to the system. One changed the password length from 12 characters to 10 characters. That could be one case. It could be that you have perhaps an external party like a hacker that's within your network, and they're trying to lower the security setting to be able to get into the network or to be able to access the network more easily. And so in that situation, you want to make sure that there is no configuration drift from what you initially set it at. And so you need whatever tool you're using to revert the changes back to the initial state that you had them. So those are the 3 steps. You push your controls, you monitor them, and then you revert any changes so that you don't have configuration drift. So so in this slide, I'm actually going to illustrate settings or specific settings that you can monitor, let's say, in an application like Box. So within Palerra Solution, we allow you to set various password controls, authentication controls, session controls for Box. And in this case, I'm just going to use the example of password controls. Let's say you want to ensure that all passwords for Box within your enterprise require 2 numbers. So so you define that, and you basically push the setting to your Box account. And then the step 2 is basically monitoring that. So you have a solution that is monitoring this setting, And if there is anything that deviates from having 2 characters within the password, it basically generates an event or identifies an incident saying we recommend a value of 2, but you're currently only using 1 number. So that's the monitoring trigger that goes off. And the third thing is, at this point, you need automated remediation to push the setting back to 2. So I don't have a screenshot for that, but that is essentially what you need for continuous monitoring to be effective, and in this case, for Box specifically. So that's the second play in your playbook, continuous monitoring. Let's talk about the third play. The third play is about having threat analytics. And I wanted to use the example, like Darren said, there's just tons of examples for us to use, just from the recent high-profile attacks that we're seeing. But the third one is the example of Chase. And essentially 76 million accounts were impacted simply because they couldn't detect the threat. So there was a detection failure. And specifically when it comes to the cloud, it becomes increasingly difficult to detect threats in the cloud. And there's four reasons for that. First is the cloud has a lot of on-demand infrastructure. So if you're using AWS, you may be auto-scaling, where you have compute and storage resources come up on demand, and they get torn down when you don't need them. So using your traditional threat model, where you say, I have policy A that basically looks for a specific threat model within a resource, it doesn't work, because this resource is going up and down and being brought up on demand and being torn down. So how can you write a rule to protect something that is ephemeral, essentially? The second issue with detecting threats in the cloud is that not all cloud providers give you the same level of transparency. Some of them do give you access to event logs, some don't. Some give you access to security metadata, others don't. So it becomes really, really challenging to have a uniform way of doing threat analytics for the cloud. The third thing is consolidation of security data across the different types of cloud services. So we're not just talking about Salesforce and Box, your SaaS applications. Today you also have infrastructure as a service such as Amazon and Azure, and you've got even platform as a service, so Force.com, and where services are talking to each other via APIs, and there is no user in between, right? So you've got to basically take all of the security data generated by all these different types of cloud services and consolidate it first. So that's pretty difficult to do, and you need to do that in order to have a holistic view of security. The fourth issue is, even if you manage to bring all that together, that's a lot of data across all of these cloud services that you now have to correlate, and then you're getting into the realm of big data, analytics, and so forth. And it only gets harder because the volume of cloud usage is only going to go up in an exponential fashion. So threat analytics is pretty challenging, specifically for the cloud. And on top of that, there's 2 ways to look at threat analytics. The first is you're trying to determine threats that you know about. So in this case, you have threat models, and you basically said, I'm looking for anybody that tries to share files from their internal Box account with an external party. That's a scenario that you know that you can write a policy for. And so in a way, that's a known threat. And so you can define a static rule that looks for that, or you can look for baseline. So if Upa accesses Salesforce 5 times a day, and tomorrow she accesses it 200 times, there's a mismatch. You know her baseline is 5, and tomorrow when it's 200, there's a mismatch in the pattern of her access. So that's detecting something that's known. Now, the issue today is that there's so many threat scenarios out there. You can't rely on static rules and baselines alone. You also have to get in the notion of looking ahead of yourself and even getting to the realm of predicting threats and preventing them before they even happen. So this is where you hear about data science and machine learning, and they're looking for unknown threat patterns. So in this case, I shouldn't have to define a static rule that says if a person does action A, B, and C, then that's a threat. We need machine learning to figure out, saying, okay, action A was performed, action B was performed. Both of those actions are pretty benign when you look at them individually, but when you put them together, this looks like a threat scenario, and we're going to flag that as a threat. So that's getting into threat prediction. And above all, the key point here I want to make is that you've got to automate this, because given how many, like again, the sheer volume of cloud usage, the number of logs and security metadata that you have to parse through on your own, or you programmatically, and the fact that the threat landscape is changing so fast every day, it's really hard for you to define this and basically define static rules to do this. You have to automate the process of forensics or threat analytics, and let technology do the work for you. So in the next couple of slides, I'll show you a couple of examples of detecting a threat, and then the second one is example of predicting a threat. So in this case, you're looking at an example where we have essentially what we call a cross-application threat. So in the first action that happens is a user downloads a bunch of confidential files from Box, and maybe they're legitimately authorized to do so, but separately from that, the user then goes and uses Office 365 to email files to a person with a competitive domain, right? And so they're two separate applications, Box and Office 365, but when you put the two together, that looks awfully like there's probably some sort of suspicious activity going on with this user, and likely you have an insider threat. So if you look at the screenshot, it essentially says that we've detected a bunch of confidential documents being downloaded from Box and accompanied by an email sent to a competitor domain. So when you put that together, and again, this is done through machine learning, doing all the correlation for you, it looks like an insider threat. So that was detecting a threat. Now let's talk about predicting a threat. In this case, in this specific example, we're looking at predicting an advanced persistent threat. So in this case, we're looking at Salesforce.com as an application. So we're seeing that somebody essentially had a number, one specific user had a large number of failed logins to Salesforce, and this was in combination with a mass record deletes as well as transfers. So when you put that together, and they're also happening at unusual hours, that probably means that this user's specific account may have been hijacked. So in this case, the threat that we're predicting is that malicious code was installed on the user's machine and may have been used to perform some of these mass record transfers and deletes. So, instead of always being behind the curve on security threats, we're actually trying to get you ahead and say, hey, you have a potential problem here. And again, this can only be done through automation and through things such as machine learning and data science. The fourth play that I'm going to talk about is basically incident response, and specifically as it relates to the cloud. So the example I want to use here is obviously the infamous Target example. And obviously, Target did have a security solution in place, a FireEye solution specifically, but the issue was that nobody responded to the alert from the FireEye box. And I mean, detecting a threat or predicting a threat is just half the battle. If you don't do anything about it, you're still going to incur a breach. And so that's just as bad. So whenever you think about your security strategy, always think about how can I, once I detect threat, what do I have in place to respond to the threat or to remediate the issue? So when you look at incident response is always two parts. The first part is, if you have detected a threat, make sure it gets logged somewhere so that no matter what happens, it's not lost in the shuffle. The second thing is, once a threat is logged, you need to make sure that it's remediated. So this basically avoids what happened to Target, which is as soon as a threat was detected, some action was taken to basically close the security gap. And remediation now can be in two parts. So for specifically to cloud services, you can either have a remediation action where you perform something within the cloud service directly. So let's say I have my account got hijacked for Box, then I would want to go into Box and disable my account, right? So that's a remedial action directly within the cloud service. But then organizations, typically larger ones, already have incident response solutions in place or change management systems in place. So it doesn't necessarily have to be that your solution does the remediation directly in the cloud service. It could be that it files a ticket within your change management system. and then the change management system basically orchestrates the remediation. Or it could be that the solution, after it detects and logs the threat, it basically prompts your identity solution to basically go and disable the solution, to disable the user's account. So, remediation can be done in various ways, but the key point here is you actually really need to start thinking about automating incident response. And even though that sounds really scary to a lot of people, but the reality of it is we were kind of there. If you go back, maybe 10 years in terms of credit cards, at some point your card would get breached. You may get a phone call, or you might get declined at the store, and then you'll have to call your credit card company to find out why you got declined, and you'll find out maybe your card got breached. But in today's world, when you do have a credit card issue and there was a breach, you actually get a phone call instantly saying, hey, can you confirm these transactions? And more importantly, they're hardly ever a human today that calls you. It's basically a machine that says, we have seen invalid transactions on your credit card. Can you verify these last 5? If they're fraudulent, please speak with an operator. So something to that effect is essentially what happens. So we've seen the automation of credit card security, and I think that security as a whole, even for enterprises, needs to get to that level of automation at some point, just because we can't keep up with the velocity of threats. And in this example, I'm just simply showing the cross-cloud threat that we had seen earlier, the fact that it needs to get logged. And so here is a log for that specific threat. We've prioritized it as high. You can reassign it to whoever you want to remediate it, or you can actually have it set to auto remediation. I don't have a screenshot showing that, but essentially that will go and then take care of the remedial action that's required. So with that, let me spend a few minutes basically telling you about the LORIC platform from Palerra. It provides capabilities in the 4 different areas that we talked about, which is threat detection, predictive analytics, continuous monitoring, incident response. But the key thing I really want to focus on here is the fact that all of these capabilities are in a single platform. Because as I said earlier, if you detect a threat but you don't do incident response for it, you've kind of lost the battle already. So it really is important to have all these capabilities in a single platform. You could have them in 2 platforms. So let's say you have threat detection being done by one solution, and then it hands off to an incident response solution, which is a completely different platform. That's fine as long as you make sure that the integration works really well and there are absolutely no gaps in the handoff. So in LORIC's case, everything is in a single platform. It is a SaaS solution where you can have a public, where basically we have public and private cloud options, and there is absolutely no hardware, no software, or no agents to install. So you can get started on LORIC within minutes, and then you can start seeing security data populate within your dashboard, soon after that. Specifically, what are the key things you can hope to achieve with LORIC? First of all, it's that gap-free protection, right? So as I said, you were doing threat detection as well as incident response all in one platform, and we can basically monitor your SaaS, your platform as a service, and your infrastructure as a service from using LORIC. That way you have full coverage of your entire cloud footprint. The second thing you can achieve is compliance. So if you just want to do nothing but continuous monitoring, LORIC allows you to basically connect to each of the applications that you're trying to monitor and simply push controls, monitor them, and then enforce these controls so that there is no configuration drift, so you're always compliant. So if compliance is your concern, that's another area that we can provide you with peace of mind. And the last thing is cost savings. Simply due to the fact that you're automating a lot of your security lifecycle, all the way from threat detection to incident response, you are basically freeing up your time to be able to go and do other tasks. And so, it's saving a lot of manual labor from your IT team so that they can focus on things that are more strategic. So with that, let me give you a quick synopsis of who is Palerra. We are basically what we call ourselves a cloud security automation company, meaning that we automate threat detection to incident response, specifically for cloud services. We launched in 2014, and we've received a couple of cool awards that we're really proud of in the last couple of months, and that's been very exciting. In terms of the technologies or the specific cloud services that we support today, there's quite a few of them, but to name a few, there's Office 365, AWS, Box, Salesforce, and GitHub. We partner with a lot of solution providers out there, but our good friends at Simeio we've definitely been working very closely with them. And then we're a Cloud Security Alliance corporate member. In terms of our investors, we are funded by Norwest Ventures and Wing. So now let me kind of hand it back to Darren, who can tell you a little bit more about Simeio Solutions. Darren?
Yeah, thanks, Upa. So in the beginning of the session, I talked a bunch about the various threats and breaches that exist and that have occurred and how these things keep growing exponentially due to many different factors. And Upa, expanded on that with even more examples of threats and breaches and such. I also talked about the various technologies that are out there that exist to help protect us. And, Upa explained how Palerra is addressing some of these new threats that we're only now just starting to see as we interface more and more with cloud applications. So, one of the key takeaways from the session today that I hope you guys will get is that, one small piece of the puzzle in this playbook is the technology, but it's also critical to partner with an expert that can help you on this journey to being safe and protected in in this new dynamic world. At Simeio, we're a leading provider of identity and access management and IT security solutions and services. And that's all we do, day in, day out. That's the heritage of our organization, and that's what we do. We're recognized by leading industry analysts and technology vendors as subject matter experts in this space. We have literally hundreds of project successes across a myriad of customers across the globe, since our founding in 2007 that we've been a part of. And we can help you choose the right technologies. We can help you implement those products and technologies and put a sound identity management and security program in place. Through our expert managed services line of business, we can take over the day-to-day operations of your security program. So when we talked about the scarcity of resources, that's really no longer a concern of you because we have those security experts in-house. And if you want that security program to be implemented as an identity as a service option, as a SaaS solution itself, we can help you do that as well through our business-ready identity and access management cloud. So here at this company, at Simeio, we sell solutions. We don't sell products. We're not necessarily tied to any one specific vendor, one specific technology, one specific model. So we really are free to partner with our customers and deliver a perfect fit solution for them. And Upa, if you wouldn't mind just moving to I think it's the final slide that we have. So we just want to leave you with this resource slide. You can find more information about Simeio and Palerra on our respective websites, Twitter feeds, or please feel free to drop us a note and connect live. I guess with that, Upa, I think if you wanted to just open things for questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Darren. So hopefully, we were able to kind of help you guys figure out what are the things you need to consider when putting together your security playbook. And if you do have any questions, please enter them into the Q&A manager within the GoToWebinar platform, and we'll take those come in. I've actually noticed that there have been a few questions that have come in, so we're going to get started by answering those. But then if you have any others, just feel free to keep prompting them our way. So the first question, this one's for you, Darren, is what are some of the advantages of this approach where customers work with providers like yourself versus trying to do it yourself? Because obviously there are SIEMs and things like that out there.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, being a services provider, we see that it's really an ever-changing landscape that we see out there. I mean, these threats are coming at us, and new threats are coming every day. So unless you really live and breathe this stuff and this space every day, you really, I think, run the risk of being behind the times. So within Simeio, I think we have the benefit of being able to pull from experiences that we picked up on various projects. We start to see patterns, and we're constantly training the folks here at Simeio on the latest and greatest features and capabilities of the various vendor technologies that are out there. Which really led to the partnership with Palerra, right? You guys have offered something that's unique in the market that helps our customers address a specific problem set. So we've built a practice around that so that we can really provide a holistic approach. So yeah, do it yourself versus partnering with someone, and obviously I'm making a pitch to partner with Simeio, but you really do want to partner with people that have done this before to benefit from their shared experiences.
Great, thanks, Darren. So the next question, and I can handle this one, is basically, cloud providers already provide a level of security today. So what are the benefits of having additional security on top of that? And that's a really, really good question. So given all the recent high-profile breaches that we've seen, cloud providers are really working hard to provide you with additional security controls so that you can be more in control of what's going on with your cloud applications. And that's really great. It's a step in the right direction. The issue is each cloud provider does security in a different way. So if you have, let's say, hundreds, even 20, maybe 100 cloud applications or within your network that your employees are using, it's really hard to basically have a holistic view across all of them because, as I said, every provider is different. And then specifically, the example of the cross-cloud threat that I showed you, I mean, you can only do that if you have if you abstract security a layer above the cloud applications, where you look at both Box activities as well as Office 365 activities and correlate the two. So you do need to have a layer on top of your cloud applications beyond what the cloud providers themselves provide in terms of security controls to do that kind of thing. So, there is definitely good merit to have that additional layer of security, and obviously, that's something that Loric provides.
And I guess Upa and I would just even add to that, you talk about kind of this, cross-cloud correlation to detect and then remediate against threats, and then just tying back to also then correlating those with on-prem applications and such, so you really are getting a full holistic view. So I think that abstraction layer that you reference is very important from the cloud perspective, as well as to then be able to take that information and tie that back to kind of what's going on within the four walls of your organization as well.
Yep, great point. Excellent. I have another question here that says, if a cloud protection solution is already in place, so I've got my, what kind of security threats are we still vulnerable to? And so I think if I understand this correctly, what you're asking is, I've got my castle, I've built my walls, I mean, I'm clearly all prepared to deal with security issues, but, what am I missing in terms of not having a detection or an incident response solution in place? And, that's a really good question. So let's assume that you have an insider, right? And we've heard lots of cases recently of high-profile attacks where you've got an insider that is either malicious or not even malicious. They could just be uninformed about security hygiene. So in that case, even if you built walls for your castle, they're already inside the network, and they could exfiltrate data outwards maliciously or inadvertently. And in that situation, they are legitimately allowed to access your network. So having these walls, they're going to get past the gate and into your kingdom because they are authorized to do so. So in that case, it's not enough to just say I'm going to build walls around my castle. I also need to figure out if there is, let's say, a Trojan horse within the kingdom that I need to figure out, that I need to detect, and then eventually do something to basically expel. So that's kind of the way I would look at it. And for sure, I mean, I think the whole conversation today is about having a layered defense system. So it's not that you need one more than the other. I think you need all parts of it put together. So have a security strategy that is broad, that says I'm going to do identity and access management across, my on-premise as well as cloud. I'm going to do threat detection on on-premise and cloud. I'm going to have incident response across both. So I think that's kind of the way to view these different layers of your security architecture.
Any other questions?
I think actually that's it. Those were the few that we had, and I think it was Thank you, Darren, for your time today. I really appreciate you partnering with us on this topic. I think that there's a lot, for all of us to kind of learn in terms of security best practices from providers like yourself that see it every day and kind of try and put the different pieces of the puzzle together and make sure that everything works together. So I'm hoping that the audience found the presentation helpful as well. Please don't hesitate to contact us. There's a bunch of resources here. Specifically, if you want, there's also a cloud security buyer's guide. So those of you that are looking at cloud services, you can go through this guide and kind of gives you a checklist of items you need to look for. There's a bunch of testimonials on Simeio's site of customers that have worked with Simeio in solving some of these security challenges, and you might find a lot of parallels in terms of what you're facing right now as well. So, Darren, any last words from you?
No, I appreciate everyone's time. I think this is a very important topic. Again, we're seeing this stuff in the papers every single day. I'm sure I can do a Google News search right now and find another breach. So very relevant, very important, and we appreciate partnering with you guys at Palerra to help our mutual customers.
Our pleasure. All right, thanks everyone.
Thanks, Upa. Bye, guys.
Thanks. Bye.